Welcome back. We're tackling some talking points in our next panel. Transit President Andy Byford says goodbye for good to the MTA. Here to break this down are CBSN New York's urban affairs expert Mark Peters and Lucy Lang, a former prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office. So let's talk about Andy Byford. He was supposed to be the savior of the MTA, and now he's gone. What does this mean for the subways?
This is terrible news for the subways and terrible news for everybody who rides the subways. In the last 2 years, he did, a phenomenal job of getting us from, something like a 50% on-time rate to an 80% on-time rate. But there's still a huge amount of work to be done. And I think that it's going to be very, very hard for the governor to recruit somebody anywhere near as talented as Byford after he essentially ran Byford out of town.
Lucy.
I was on the A train this morning and stalled underground for at least 12 minutes, and I have to say that the folks on the train with me seemed grouchier than usual. So I think that New Yorkers are reacting to his resignation.
So are we blaming Cuomo for this, or are we blaming the, let's be fair here. There was a tension because of the need for new technology.
Well, I think that, was there a tension because of the need for new technology and some disagreements there? Sure. But there was a bigger tension. I mean, the first job, probably the most important job of any chief executive in either a private company or in government, is to recruit and then retain really talented people. And Andrew Cuomo failed on doing it.
Cuomo said he was in the job for 2 years. Nobody does it for a lifetime. Lucy, how do you feel about that?
Look, he was a visionary recruit, and he did an outstanding job. And I think that we can't really assess this until we see who's put into the position next. Of course, the subways are the lifeblood of the city, and it has to be someone who is of that caliber.
But 2 years, to be honest, 2 years is just the blink of an eye in terms of this kind of work. You want somebody, when you're talking about turning around a mass transit system as big and complex as New York's, you want somebody who's going to be on the job 5, 6, 8 years.
We've never had that ever.
But look at the situation we're in. That's the kind of time span it takes to do this kind of turnaround, and you need somebody who's going to be there for that whole thing. So I think the idea that 2 years was enough time is just not right.
A 30% turnaround rate is pretty astounding in 2 years, and hopefully his successor can do the same, and look where we'll be then.
Right. It certainly is, and I give him tremendous credit for what he did, but everything that he did is still not nearly enough, and that's not to take away credit from him. In 2 years, he did a phenomenal amount of work, but that's part of the reason why this is a 6 to 8 year project, because we're still at 80% on time. That's getting to work 1 day a week late.
So, but here's the real question. Should the state continue to run the city's transit system, or should, as Corey Johnson said, should there be a municipal takeover of the transit authority part of the MTA? Lucy?
I think it really does need to be collaborative. There are funding questions, there are management questions, there are personnel questions, and to my mind, this is something that has to be handled on a state and city level.
I think that that's probably right, especially in terms of the funding questions. In an ideal world, if you could work out the funding questions and the personnel questions, would it be better if New York City had autonomous control of its subway system? Absolutely. But I agree with you. I'm not sure how you get there given the funding, the personnel, and the capital questions involved.
And does any mayor have the ability to understand the transit system?
Well, whether a mayor does, a mayor at least is more directly accountable for these kinds of things than a governor is. I mean, a governor, either way.
Except for this governor who's like a gearhead who pays attention to this.
Well, but this governor is also, if this governor were really, really paying attention, he would have done everything in his power to keep Andy Byford happy and on the job. So
let's talk to politics. We have a situation where the wife of the mayor of the city of New York, Chirlane McCray, is eyeing a run for Brooklyn Borough President. Is this a good idea, a bad idea? How do you feel about it, Lucy?
I'm a Manhattanite, so I can't say that I have a deep sense of what Brooklyn wants in terms of their borough president. I think that there is always a question when someone puts forward a spouse for a position within their jurisdiction. But my hope is that the people of Brooklyn will choose the best possible person to serve in that role.
Right. Well, I'm a Brooklynite, and I'm not sure I know what the people of Brooklyn want either.
But let's talk about the idea of the fact that the mayor of the city of New York is trying to cut a deal with, apparently, allegedly, with the Brooklyn officials to support his wife.
Well, look,
which, by the way, opens up donor channels and things like that, which you know a lot about, Mark.
I sure do. So on one level, obviously you can't blame anyone for helping their spouse achieve a job that they want, if indeed it's a job she really wants. On the other hand, I think that given that he is mayor, he needs to be enormously careful, much more careful than he's been in the past, as we've seen, about how he goes about using the office of mayor to promote the candidacy of his wife. And as we know from a bunch of reports that have come out, including one from the agency I used to run, he's not been sufficiently careful in the past.
So, keeping along the Brooklyn theme, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams gave a fiery speech this week attacking what he sees as the evils of gentrification, saying that some people should go back to Iowa and Ohio. Let's take a listen to what he said.
You were here before Starbucks. You were here before others came and decided they wanted to be part of this city. Folks are not only hijacking your apartments and displacing your living arrangements, they displace your conversations and said the things that are important to you are no longer important, and they decide what's important and what's not important. Go back to Iowa, you go back to Ohio. New York City belongs to the people that was here and made New York City what it is. And I know I'm a New Yorker. I protected this city. I have a right to put my voice in how the city should run.
So here's the question. Was this a mistake or part of his 2021 campaign for mayor?
Is the question whether it was aimed at Councilman Johnson?
No, I think the question really has to do with, given the rise in hate crimes and things like that, and the concern of many in this city and this state about hatred and lack of tolerance, saying that people from Iowa and Ohio and other places should go back can foment more hatred. And is this a responsible thing for somebody who's running for mayor to say? Now, do you think he made a mistake, or is this part of a calculated campaign issue? Because there are a lot of people who are worried about gentrification in this city. And, it's not just limited to Brooklyn. I mean, gentrification is going on in all 5 boroughs.
So I do think it was a mistake. I think it was, clearly an inappropriate thing to say. He's admitted as much by walking it back.
He only walked it back after he was criticized.
True, but, he could have leaned into it and said, no, I really meant it. Look, obviously gentrification is a real issue. Obviously one of the existential crises facing New York City is the lack of affordable housing. But the way that you deal with that is not by telling people go back to Iowa, it's by building more affordable housing.
Lucy.
I admire Eric Adams' service as a police officer and as a public servant. I agree with Mark that this kind of vitriol really doesn't have a place in our city and amongst our public servants, and I think that he's acknowledged as much. I do think that we have to be really mindful about how we bring this kind of divisive conversation into the public sphere, because if he, for example, had been referring to immigrants from other countries, there would have been perhaps an even greater outcry in response. And the way I see it, really New York's great strength is our diversity, and the suggestion that anyone who comes here shouldn't be welcomed undermines that really core part of our identity as New Yorkers.
Mark, do you think we're guilty of over-gentrification in this city?
I don't know that we're guilty of over-gentrification, because obviously we want people coming to New York. New York for 200 years, 300 years, has had people coming to New York. I do think we're guilty of not dealing with the consequences of gentrification, which is the loss of affordable housing. So the reason gentrification is a problem is not because people from Ohio want to move here. We want people moving here from all over. The reason it's a problem is that we haven't taken the steps that are necessary to make sure that we have a stable and ever-increasing supply of affordable housing, so that people who have been living in New York for a long time can afford to continue living in New York.
So I just
That's
want
the
to
problem we gotta
quickly
tackle.
talk about the state budget and the fact that the governor is trying to say that there's really no $6 billion gap and that we can balance it by cutting Medicaid and other spending. I wonder if you think that this ultimately will lead to new taxes as members of the legislature try to compensate for what looks like shortages in education and Medicaid aid. Quick answers, because we're almost out of time.
I think that if we see new taxes, it'll be at the 11th hour and 59th minute when nothing else has worked.
As a criminal justice reformer, my biggest concern with the budget is that the city and state are building out appropriate infrastructure to deal with the criminal justice reforms that have just gone into effect.
Thank you both for joining us today on The Point.